Hello again, friend. Settle into your pillow. Let your shoulders sink. Let the day loosen its hold on you like an old cloak slipping from your back. Tonight, we continue our quiet journey through time. The fog of the Anarchy has lifted. The shouting of nobles has faded into memory. And England, after nearly 20 years of political tug-of-war, is finally beginning to breathe again. It is 1154. A new king stands at the threshold of London, a man not born in the city, not raised in it, but destined to shape its future more than anyone since the conquest. His name is Henry Plantagenet, Henry II. The son Matilda fought for the heir Stephen finally acknowledged, and the monarch the kingdom didn't just want, but desperately needed. London, weary yet unbroken, greets him cautiously, like a cat meeting a new owner and thinking, I will observe you silently for 3 months before deciding whether I approve. The city has changed dramatically since 1066. Its markets broader, its walls stronger, its tower taller, its trade richer, its people more diverse, and its ambition sharper than ever. London is no longer the fragile medieval town William the Conqueror subdued. It has become the engine of the kingdom. A restless heart beating beside the Thames. And Henry II steps into this city with the mind of a strategist, the will of a reformer, and the energy of someone who drinks far too much medieval coffee, which did not exist, but Henry somehow acted like it did. Under him, London will enter a new golden dawn. Law will tighten, corruption will shrink, courts will expand, trade will boom, guilds will flourish, stone architecture will rise, churches will multiply, bridges will change, and a new kind of English identity will begin to take form. Tonight, we walk through this rising world together. A world of kings and courts, merchants and monasteries, pilgrims and poets, markets and miracles, stonework and scandals. So take a breath, slow and steady. Let the warmth gather around you. Let the rhythm of the evening soften the thoughts still wandering through your mind. You are safe here, moving gently through centuries, as London grows, changes, learns, and stretches toward a future bigger than any of its citizens could imagine. This is the story of a city awakening. A London stepping confidently into the Middle Ages, not as a survivor of chaos, but as a rising power. And you, friend, are here to witness it. When you're ready, we begin. Chapter 1. Henry II, the king who cleaned up the kingdom. When Henry II took the throne in 1154, England felt like a house that had been left unattended for far too long. The doors creaked, the windows rattled, the neighbors gossiped, and somewhere in the distance a noble was probably yelling, "I swear loyalty to no one except myself and maybe my horse." Such was the state of the kingdom after 19 years of civil war. The anarchy had not just strained London, It had soaked through the entire country like rain, leaking through a thatched roof. Laws were ignored. Castles popped up everywhere like mushrooms after a storm. Nobles ruled their own mini-kingdoms. And justice? Well, justice packed a suitcase and went on a long vacation. But into this chaos stepped Henry II, a man with the determination of someone who has just opened a messy drawer and refuses to look away until it's perfectly organized. A king in constant motion. Henry II was not a still man. He walked fast. He talked fast. He worked fast. Medieval chroniclers wrote that he rarely sat down, and when he did, he looked like it offended him. One described him as a man who seems composed entirely of energy. Another noted that he disliked ceremony, delays, and people who wasted time, which means Henry would have had zero patience for medieval meetings. He was the kind of king who would arrive in London with 10 reforms already planned, 12 more forming in his head, and a clerk scrambling behind him with ink pots and parchment screaming, "Your Majesty, slow down." London greets its new monarch. When Henry entered London, the city didn't erupt into wild celebration. Londoners weren't the type to throw confetti into the air like excited pigeons. They watched. They calculated. They measured the new king with squinted eyes and cautious curiosity. And slowly, very slowly, the murmurs began. He seems steady. He seems young, but sharp. He doesn't seem likely to burn the city down accidentally. Promising. He actually knows how laws work. Incredible. After 2 decades of chaos, London didn't need charm. London needed competence. And competence is exactly what Henry brought. Justice returns to the kingdom. One of the first things Henry II did as king was reintroduce something England had been missing: order. He wasn't interested in ruling through fear, or making grand speeches, or wearing the fanciest robes. Henry liked systems. He liked structure. He liked things that worked, and what worked best for Henry was law. Royal judges toured the kingdom. They enforced the king's justice, not whatever a local baron felt after waking up in a bad mood. Trials became more standardized. You could no longer bribe your way to a verdict or rely on trial by, "Let's throw this person in a river and hope God feels chatty today." Records were organized. For the first time in years, the kingdom's paperwork began to make sense. Clerks rejoiced. Illuminated manuscripts sighed in relief. Henry's reforms spread like sunlight across the kingdom. Quietly, steadily, warming everything they touched. And London, the administrative center, felt the shift more strongly than anywhere else. London begins to rise. Under Henry II, London began to breathe again. Markets expanded. Ships came in larger numbers from Normandy, Flanders, the Rhineland, and beyond. New goods appeared. Finer textiles, better wine, exotic spices, tools, luxuries. The clatter of trade filled the air. Coins rang like bells in merchants' hands. Craftsmen hammered away in workshops that glowed orange with firelight. Guilds gained influence. These were groups of craftsmen, bakers, weavers, carpenters, fishmongers, who banded together for protection and quality control. A guild seal on a product meant this won't fall apart immediately. A rare guarantee in medieval times. Roads improved. Well, relatively. They were still muddy, uneven, and occasionally home to a cow with boundary issues. But they were better. Security strengthened. London's walls were repaired. Gatehouses improved. Night watches patrolled. The tower's administrative role grew. It wasn't just a fortress anymore. It was becoming the kingdom's archive, treasury, and power center. London had always endured. Now it began to thrive. Henry and London, a mutual understanding. Henry didn't adore ceremony, and London didn't adore dramatic monarchs. So, in a way, they were perfect for each other. London wanted stability. Henry wanted efficiency. Henry saw London as a base of operations, a treasury, a communications hub, a legal center, and the best place to get work done quickly. London saw Henry as reliable, intelligent, energetic, and unlikely to declare a sudden surprise civil war. This was a working relationship rooted in practicality. And in the Middle Ages, practicality was gold. A new kind of England emerges. Henry II was not just cleaning up a kingdom. He was reshaping it entirely. He laid the foundation of the English legal system, centralized royal authority, and ensured that no noble, however bold, could forget who truly ruled England. You could feel the change in the air, in the quiet confidence of merchants, in the steady growth of trade, in the orderly structure of courts, in the hum of construction around the city, in the new parishes rising on London's outskirts, in the way people spoke of the king with a tone that resembled hope. London had survived chaos. Now, under Henry, it was learning to grow. The king who kept moving. Henry traveled constantly across his vast territories, from England to Normandy, Aquitaine to Anjou, Wales to Scotland. But whenever he returned to London, the city responded like a great instrument being tuned. Judges prepared new cases. Clerks sharpened quills. Guild masters lined up petitions. Merchants brought gifts, some tasteful, some questionable. Builders sought approval for new projects, and the tower's officials straightened their records with anxious pride. Henry didn't stay long, but his presence reshaped everything. He was a king who left order in his wake. The quiet transformation. By the end of Henry II's first decade as king, London was no longer just a city that survived. It was a city that led, a city whose voice mattered, a city whose merchants shaped economies, a city whose laws guided the kingdom, a city whose influence stretched farther each year. Henry didn't set out to transform London, but he did, by transforming the kingdom around it. He cleared away the debris of civil war. He tamed rebellious nobles. He made justice predictable. He empowered trade. He strengthened institutions. In doing so, he polished London until it gleamed, not with gold, not with jewels, but with purpose. And purpose in the Middle Ages was rarer than any gemstone. London was ready for the next steps, the great construction projects, the rise of Gothic architecture, the coming of parliaments, the ascent of new kings, and the dramatic events waiting just beyond the horizon. But those belong to the next chapter. Chapter 2. The not-so-quiet power of Eleanor of Aquitaine. When Henry II became king, London gained more than a ruler. It gained a queen unlike any England had ever seen before. A woman whose life reads like a saga, whose personality could outshine entire courts, and whose influence stretched across kingdoms like sunlight spilling over hills. Her name was Eleanor of Aquitaine, and she was magnificent. The woman who brought the South with her. Most English queens came from nearby lands, Normandy, Flanders, maybe a distant German duchy, but Eleanor came from Aquitaine, a region in the warm golden south of France where poets sang under castle windows, troubadours invented romantic poetry, wine flowed like river water, and the climate encouraged people to be generally less grumpy. Then she arrived in England, cold, rainy, misty England, and married Henry II, a man who didn't sit down unless absolutely necessary. Londoners had never seen anything like her. While Henry moved like a storm, Eleanor moved like a queen in a tapestry, still, regal, glowing with authority. People whispered about her beauty, her sharp intelligence, her confidence, her library, her cultured upbringing, and the fact that she had once been Queen of France before becoming Queen of England. Yes, she used to be married to the King of France. Yes. She divorced him. Yes. She married Henry II shortly afterward. Eleanor's life had more plot twists than a modern TV drama. Eleanor arrives in London. When Eleanor entered London, the city paused, not stopped. London never stops, but paused as if the air itself wanted a better look. Her arrival brought a breath of foreign luxury into the medieval streets. Finer fabrics, southern fashions, new music, new manners, new expectations. She brought her own entourage, her own culture, her own worldview, and London, practical as ever, thought, well, this is new. A queen who was not quiet. Eleanor was not a background character in anyone's life, not in Henry's, not in her children's, and not in London's. She advised Henry, traveled widely, held courts in her own style, patronized poets, shaped royal marriages, managed her vast southern territories, and ruled with a confidence few medieval women were allowed to show. Londoners admired her, some feared her, a few envied her, but no one ignored her, not even Henry. A royal partnership that shaped a city. Henry and Eleanor had a relationship best described as powerful, complicated, and occasionally explosive. They respected each other, challenged each other, supported each other, and sometimes infuriated each other. Like all great partnerships, it produced remarkable results: political stability, cultural growth, diplomatic connections, enormous territories that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees, and a royal family that would shape the next century. London sat at the center of this empire, the hub of administration, trade, diplomacy, and court life. Eleanor made sure that London wasn't just an English city, but a European one. She brought with her new courtly customs, refined etiquette, continental fashion, and a taste for luxury that made London's merchants very, very happy. Eleanor's influence on London's culture. Eleanor's court in Aquitaine had once been the heart of Europe's artistic world. Troubadours, the medieval singer-songwriters, created poetry, music, and tales of chivalry under her patronage. Now, echoes of that southern culture drifted into London. Suddenly, stories grew more romantic, songs carried softer melodies, fashions included richer colors, manners became slightly more refined, and nobles tried, often unsuccessfully, to look elegant while standing in muddy streets. London absorbed all of it, like a sponge soaking up sunlight. It didn't become Aquitaine overnight. You can't turn a misty medieval city into a poetic southern court with just a few lutes and colorful cloaks. But Eleanor's influence laid the seeds of a cultural shift that would bloom fully in the coming centuries. Eleanor and London's religious landscape. Eleanor also strengthened ties to major religious institutions. She funded churches, supported monastic communities, encouraged education, and connected London's clergy with scholars from Paris, Poitiers, and Tours. This brought new ideas into the city: philosophy, theology, law, Latin scholarship. Monks copied texts with greater precision. Priests learned more refined liturgical styles. Schools grew. Libraries expanded slowly but steadily. And London became not just a political center, but an intellectual one as well. A queen in a kingdom of stone. By the late 1150s, London was transforming. Stone buildings rose more frequently. Norman architecture blended into early Gothic. Markets widened. Trade thickened like a living river. Ships crowded the Thames. Guilds organized. Churches multiplied. And through this evolving landscape walked Eleanor, a queen of immense presence. Some chroniclers described her as imperious. Others called her commanding. One monk wrote that she was a woman above all others, which is medieval monk language for "She was so impressive that my quill hand trembled." Eleanor was not the soft, silent ideal of medieval queenship. She was a force, and London, ever drawn to strength, absorbed her influence quietly. But every golden dawn has its shadows. Eleanor and Henry's marriage was brilliant until it wasn't. They had many children, some of whom would become kings, some rebels, some legends. But the very traits that made Eleanor powerful, her intelligence, her independence, or her political skill also made her dangerous to those who preferred a queen who did not speak too loudly or think too sharply. London watched as tensions grew. The royal couple disagreed on policies. Eleanor preferred Aquitaine to England. Their sons grew ambitious. Henry's temper sparked. Eleanor's patience thinned. Alliances shifted. Rumors spread like wildfire in alehouses. Londoners didn't always know the details, but they sensed the tremors. The subtle changes in whispers, the shifts in court behavior, the sudden silences in the tower's halls. Even a city as large as London could feel the strain of a royal marriage piled high with politics. A queen who would not fade. Yet through every storm, political, marital, diplomatic, Eleanor did not vanish. She refused to shrink, refused to settle, refused to be forgotten, even when separated from Henry, and later imprisoned for supporting her son's rebellion. Her presence still shaped the kingdom. London continued to feel her influence in the alliances she helped craft, the cultural imports she inspired, the artistic tradition she planted, the royal children she raised, children who would shape London's next century. Eleanor was a queen whose shadow stretched long, and London stood firmly within it. A city under two forces. While Henry gave London law, order, administration, justice, and stability, Eleanor gave London culture, elegance, artistic spirit, diplomacy, and a whisper of refined Southern grace. Together, even in conflict, they forged a city ready for greatness. A city that could rule an empire, a city that could birth legends, a city that could survive anything. Because it had tasted everything, London was becoming something new, something greater, something richer, something uniquely London. And as Henry and Eleanor's partnership reached its complex middle chapters, the city continued to grow beneath them, quietly, steadily, confidently, ready for the kings who would follow, ready for the storms to come, ready for its place in history. But that, my friend, takes us to the next chapter. Chapter 3, London and the Birth of Gothic Dreams. When Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine ruled, something subtle began to stir across Europe. A shift in the way people dreamed about buildings, faith, and beauty. It began in France, whispered through abbeys and cathedrals, and spread like light creeping along a church floor at dawn. This new idea had a name. Gothic. Not the black eyeliner, pale lipstick. I listened to emotional music in my room, kind of Gothic. We're a few centuries early for that. But the architectural revolution that would change Europe forever. And London, always hungry for the new, always stretching toward the future, was ready to let those dreams take root. A new way of building, a new way of thinking. Before Gothic architecture, buildings aimed mostly to be sturdy, practical, square, safe. Like someone who always carries an umbrella, even when the weather is fine. Norman Romanesque architecture was heavy, thick walls, small windows, rounded arches, dim interiors, and a general vibe of, we survived the Vikings and we're not taking chances. But Gothic architecture arrived like a breath of fresh air. It said, what if walls didn't need to be so heavy? What if spaces could be full of light? What if churches could feel like upward movement, as if stone itself were praying? So architects began to push limits. Pointed arches that reached toward heaven. Ribbed vaults that spread weight gracefully. Flying buttresses that let walls grow thin and elegant. Huge stained glass windows that told stories in glowing color. Verticality everywhere, as if the buildings themselves wanted to stand on tiptoe. Light became the new sacred language. Space became a kind of silent music. And London listened. The monks who built while half asleep. If you imagine Gothic architecture spreading like wildfire, you might expect a dramatic scene. Architects bursting into London like medieval rock stars shouting, "Let there be pointed arches!" But no, it came through monasteries, quiet places of prayer, study, and occasional snoring. Monks traveled between England and France, copying ideas the same way they copied manuscripts slowly, carefully, with great devotion, occasionally smudging ink when they got distracted by a bird outside the window. They saw the new style rising in Sans-Paris, Chartres. They whispered about it. They sketched it in margins. And when they returned to England, they brought the seeds of Gothic architecture with them. London was fertile ground. St. Paul's Cathedral begins to shift. The old St. Paul's Cathedral, the one before the Great Fire of 1666, was not yet the grand building we imagine today. It was medieval, massive, and built and rebuilt over centuries. In Henry II's time, the cathedral began to adopt Gothic elements. Windows widened, arches sharpened, clear stories rose, choirs echoed with new brightness. Imagine stepping inside a cold hush, a flicker of candles, a trace of incense drifting through the air, and shafts of colored light falling across stone floors like pieces of heaven. Even if you weren't religious, you would feel something inside your chest, something that whispered, "This place is speaking." Gothic architecture wasn't just a style, it was a feeling. London's monasteries glow with new light. London in the 12th century was full of monasteries. St. Mary's Clerkenwell, Holy Trinity Priory, St. Bartholomew's, the Augustinian houses, the new foundations rising beyond the old walls. Each one had its own personality. Some were strict, some were scholarly, some were surprisingly enthusiastic about brewing ale. But Gothic design touched them all. Cloisters opened wider, refectories grew loftier. Chapter houses rose with elegant ribs. Church naves stretched upward like trees reaching for the sun. Even the monks, often weary from endless chanting at odd hours of the night, paused to marvel. Some chroniclers wrote about the new beauty of London's holy spaces. Others described them as light-filled or gracefully raised. A few wrote poetic lines. That sounded suspiciously like monks experiencing architectural joy. For the first time in decades, the city learns to reach upward. In earlier centuries, London built sideways. More houses, more markets, more streets. The city sprawled like a creature trying to get comfortable. But under the Plantagenets, London began building upward. Even secular buildings grew taller: guild halls, merchant houses, stone warehouses, official buildings, courts, towers, gatehouses, and civic structures with more ambition than ever. For the first time in its history, London looked upward in earnest, reaching, stretching, yearning. Pointed arches appeared in unexpected places. Windows grew larger, craftsmen experimented, stonecutters practiced new shapes, carpenters learned new angles. It was a quiet shift, but profound. A city once known for wooden huts and smoky halls was developing a skyline. A new generation of craftsmen. Gothic architecture required skill, lots of it. Stonecutters had to know the exact curve of an arch. Carpenters needed to understand tension and balance. Glaziers had to assemble stained glass like assembling tiny jewels. Masons needed to carve ribs that would support the weight of heaven. Blacksmiths forged tools and nails for shapes no one had attempted before. And each new building became a classroom. Apprentices learned by watching hands dusty with stone powder, eyes wide with awe. Masters debated angles and measurements over mugs of ale, then woke up at dawn to try again. In this way, Gothic architecture did something remarkable. It educated London. The city's craftsmen gained new skills, new knowledge, new pride. And with every arch raised, with every window fitted, with every rib laid into place, London grew more sophisticated. The Tower of London adopts the new style. Even the White Tower, stern, square, proud, and stubborn, could not entirely resist the Gothic influence. Additions were made, chapels were modified, windows were altered, arches sharpened slightly. Details softened. The tower remained intimidating, of course. It always would. But it gained touches of grace, as if even this great fortress wanted a little light inside its stone heart. Gothic architecture and the English spirit. It's easy to think architecture is just walls and roofs, but in medieval society, architecture was a language. The shift from Romanesque to Gothic told Londoners, we are part of something bigger, something continental, something rising. It was a sign of renewed stability, expanding trade, evolving spirituality, growing wealth, and confidence in the future. London looked more modern, more European, more ambitious. It was a visual announcement that the city was stepping onto the world stage and was not planning to leave. A city that reflects its people. As buildings reached upward, so did lives. Londoners were dreaming more boldly, trading more widely, learning more rapidly, traveling more frequently, connecting more deeply with the rest of Europe. Gothic architecture was simply the stone and glass version of what was happening in the city's soul. And if you walked through London at the end of Henry II's reign, you would feel it dash dash. In the streets, in the markets, in the churches, in the very air. The city was preparing for something bigger, the rise of universities, the explosion of literature, the drama of future kings, and the great transformations waiting in the next century. Sleep thought. The city lifts its eyes. As London's arches sharpened, its windows widened, and its towers rose, the city seemed to whisper, "We survived the storms. Now we rise." Gothic architecture was the first sign that London was ready to dream again, not sideways, not cautiously, but upward, with confidence and grace. And that new spirit, that upward breath, would carry the city through the next great chapters of its medieval journey. Chapter 4: London, Law, and the Legend of Thomas Becket. If Henry II's reign brought order to England, then one story from his time stands taller than all the rest. A story of friendship, ambition, conflict, faith, tragedy, and the kind of dramatic ending medieval writers absolutely adored. It is the story of Thomas Becket. And London knew this story well because London was where it began.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
The London boy who became a legend. Before he was an archbishop, before he was a saint, before his name echoed in cathedrals for centuries, Thomas Becket was simply a London boy. He grew up near Cheapside, a noisy, crowded marketplace where butchers shouted prices, merchants haggled with suspicious enthusiasm, carts rattled over cobblestones, and eel sellers aggressively advertised their product. As always, Thomas's father was a merchant, respectable but not wealthy. His mother, legendary in some tales, was said to be educated and devout. Little Thomas would have walked through the old streets, between St. Mary Le Bow and the bridge, absorbing the city's pulse with every step. The smells, the cries, the bells, all of this London noise seeped into him and shaped the man he would become.
Take this to the scriptorium and have Prior Wibbert verify the seal.
The clever clerk. Thomas was bright, so bright that everyone noticed. He went to school in London, where boys learned Latin, logic, scripture, and how to avoid being hit by a flying goose at the market. Then he studied in Paris, the medieval Oxford of Europe, absorbing ideas like parchment absorbing ink. When he returned to England, his intelligence, charm, neat handwriting, and ability to survive court politics made him rise quickly. Soon, he became Archdeacon of Canterbury, a high and lucrative clerical position. But fate had bigger plans. Much bigger. The king and his friend, Henry II, met Becket and saw immediately, this man is brilliant. He should work for me. Becket became Chancellor the king's right-hand man, the mind behind royal decisions, the organizer of documents, the manager of financial matters, and the person Henry trusted above almost all others. Together they were unstoppable. They hunted together. They laughed together. They debated policies. They shared meals. They devised reforms. They acted like two halves of one ambitious engine. Chroniclers wrote that Henry loved Becket with an affection he had for no other man. Their partnership shaped England, and London saw this duo often. At the Tower, in Westminster, in the courts, in the bustling city streets. Henry was force, energy, strategy. Becket was elegance, calculation, diplomacy. London whispered, "What a pair they make." But then, a title that changed everything. When the Archbishop of Canterbury died, Henry saw an opportunity. If his friend Becket became Archbishop, the king could control the church. A perfect plan, flawless even, except for one minor problem. As soon as Becket became Archbishop, he stopped being Henry's loyal right hand and became something else entirely. A defender of the church, a guardian of clerical rights, a man of moral conviction. Henry had appointed a friend, he got a rival. London watches the rift grow. At first, the disagreements were quiet. Legal debates, disputes over authority, tense meetings in Westminster halls. But London felt the simmering tension. Courtiers whispered. Clerks exchanged nervous glances. Merchants wondered which side to support. Priests prayed. And the Tower stayed very still, as if it, too, sensed the coming storm. Henry and Becket, once united, were now orbiting each other like two planets on a collision course. The conflict peaks. The constitutions of Clarendon. In 1164, Henry pushed a set of laws to restrict church privileges. Becket resisted, not quietly, not politely, not strategically, but completely. He refused to sign. He argued. He stood firm. He acted with a stubbornness that impressed some and annoyed many. London buzzed with gossip. Henry is furious. They say Becket might be arrested. No, they say he might flee. Who do we support? Whoever protects the price of bread, hopefully. Becket did flee. Across the Channel into exile in France. For 6 years, London heard his name. In echoes, in sermons, in taverns, in royal letters, in whispered prayers. Becket returns to London, and danger follows. In 1170, the conflict softened. Becket returned from exile, stepping once again onto English soil. Crowds gathered, bells rang, people cried with devotion. London felt the tremors of something momentous, but reconciliation with Henry. It was shallow, fragile, paper-thin, and somewhere deep inside Henry, a storm was building. A king's outburst, a deadly misunderstanding. The famous moment came in a burst of royal frustration. Chroniclers described Henry shouting, "Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?" Whether he meant it literally or not, 4 knights heard it as a command, and they rode, not for London, but for Canterbury. There, in the cathedral, Thomas Becket was struck down. A murder so shocking, so brutal, so unthinkable, that Europe reeled in disbelief. London went silent, completely silent. The news spread like wildfire through the city. Becket is dead. They killed him in the church. They murdered the archbishop at the altar. Shock, grief, fear, awe. The London streets, usually full of noise, felt heavy with sorrow. The making of a saint. Within days, pilgrims began flocking to Canterbury. Within weeks, miracles were reported. The sick claimed healing. The desperate claimed comfort. The faithful claimed visions. Within 2 years, Becket was canonized. Saint Thomas of Canterbury. Londoners joined the movement, lighting candles, whispering prayers, carving his symbol into church walls. His martyrdom reshaped England. It shifted the balance of power between crown and church. It humbled Henry II. And it carved Becket's name permanently into history. London's place in the legend. Though the murder happened in Canterbury, Becket's life was undeniably tied to London. His childhood streets, his early schooling, his clerical rise, his political career, his partnership with the king, his public image, his intellectual circle, his transformation from chancellor to archbishop. The city shaped him, and after his death, his story shaped the city. London churches honored him. London merchants traveled to Canterbury as pilgrims. London kings prayed at his shrine. London chroniclers preserved his story in parchment. Even the legal reforms that followed his death flowed through Westminster and the Tower, London's beating administrative heart.
This clause secures the liberties of the church.
A quiet lesson from a loud tragedy. For London, Becket's story became a quiet reminder. Power is fragile, friendship is complex, faith is fierce, ambition is sharp, and destiny often walks a path no one expects. Londoners told his story for centuries. In markets, in monasteries, in guild halls, in taverns, in the quiet corners of candlelit rooms. And as the city grew higher, wider, richer, and more confident, Becket's memory lingered, like a soft echo under the arches of the Gothic age. Chapter 5. London and the Rise of Royal Justice. When the shock of Thomas Becket's death settled, like dust drifting slowly to the stone floor of Canterbury Cathedral, London found itself standing in the middle of a kingdom that was silently, steadily transforming. Because despite the tragedy, despite the guilt that weighed heavily on Henry II, despite the grief that echoed across England, one truth remained. Henry II was building something unprecedented, a kingdom run not by the whims of barons, not by the unpredictable moods of local lords, not by ancient customs, whispered in smoky halls, but by law, and London alive, ambitious, endlessly practical London became the heartbeat of this new world of justice. A city where the law began to speak. Before Henry II, law in England was like the weather, different in every village, unpredictable, subject to sudden changes, often dependent on whether the local lord had a good or terrible morning. But Henry changed everything. He did not just enforce laws, he reshaped them, organized them, expanded them, gave them meaning and structure. And where do you think these reforms found their home? In London, the city of records, clerks, courts, scribes, sheriffs, merchants, and messengers. London became a vast, living, legal machine. Thousands of parchment sheets, hundreds of clerks dipping quills, scribes copying laws until their wrists ached, messengers galloping in and out of city gates, judges moving like chess pieces across the kingdom. Law was no longer a distant concept. It was something Londoners could feel moving through the city, like a new river under the old streets. The king's justices, travelers with enormous responsibility. Henry created a system of itinerant justices, royal judges who traveled the kingdom like legal pilgrims. Their journey always began in London. Picture them saddlebags full of parchment, heavy seal boxes hanging from their belts, letters from the king tucked carefully inside their cloaks, clerks trailing behind, complaining about the dust, and horses probably wondering why they hadn't chosen a quieter life. These judges carried London's order into the countryside. They brought clarity, consistency, royal authority, and a sense that justice was no longer something you negotiated with your neighbor during a dispute about chickens. Wherever they went, people gathered. Some came seeking fairness. Some came fearful of judgment. Some came simply because, in the 12th century, a visiting judge was more exciting than most forms of entertainment. And when the judges returned to London, that they brought back disputes, fines, land cases, appeals, accusations, royal revenues, and new precedents. Everything flowed through the city like a tide of ink and authority. The birth of the assizes, law on the move. Henry's most brilliant idea was deceptively simple. If people cannot come to justice, justice will go to them. So he created the assizes, traveling courts that visited regions regularly. It sounds ordinary now, but in the 12th century, this was revolutionary. And London was the anchor point, the place where laws were decided, records were kept, and judges received their orders. The assizes standardized trial procedures, penalties, property rights, land disputes, criminal charges, and appeals. This meant that a man in Yorkshire, a woman in Kent, and a merchant in London were judged by the same rules, a concept shockingly modern for its time. Londoners loved it, merchants especially. Nothing makes a medieval merchant happier than predictable law. Trial by jury. The quiet revolution. One of the greatest transformations born in Henry II's reign was the early form of the jury system. In the past, guilt was determined by methods such as trial by ordeal, fire, water, or other creative terrors, duel, or asking God to reveal the truth through questionable outcomes. Henry introduced something different. 12 local men, sworn under oath, convened to give testimony based on knowledge, observation, and common sense. London embraced this system quickly. It fit perfectly with the city's administrative strength and its love of structured order. Through London's courts, the jury system grew stronger, more refined, and more trusted. And slowly, quietly, dash, England became the first major European kingdom to rely on communal judgment instead of divine theatrics.
20 shillings here. Mark that on the tally, clerk. Aye, master.
London, the capital of records. If justice is a machine, records are the gears. And London kept them all. The Royal Chancery, the administrative office, worked inside the Tower of London and Westminster. Imagine the scene: dozens of clerks in long robes, quills scratching across parchment, wax seals cooling on tables, scrolls stacked high like miniature towers. Clerks had two responsibilities: don't misspell anything. Don't spill ink on the king's orders. London's clerks preserved every grant of land, a court ruling, tax order, judgment, royal letter, legal reform, and treaty. They wrote until late at night, their candles flickering, their backs aching, but their work creating the foundation of English law. London sheriffs and the weight of authority. Sheriffs were royal officers responsible for order across the city. They managed courts, prisons, markets, patrols, taxes, trade regulations, and everything else that made London function. Under Henry II's reforms, their roles grew sharper, clearer, more professional. Being a sheriff in London was not glamorous. It involved counting money, repeatedly chasing criminals through alleys, dealing with merchants who accidentally mismeasured grain, and arguing with guilds over who controlled which street. But London sheriffs understood something crucial. The stronger the law, the stronger the city. And they enforced it with determination. The Tower of London, a fortress of law. By the 1170s, the tower was no longer just a castle. It was the kingdom's archive, the treasury, a legal center, a royal residence, a symbol of authority, and a place where prisoners contemplated their life choices, and often regretted several of them. Royal justices operated inside its walls. Sheriffs brought records there. Clerks stored documents in its rooms. Messengers arrived with sealed writs. The tower wasn't just the symbol of Norman rule anymore. It was the nerve center of Henry II's legal revolution. Why London embraced the new justice? London has always been practical, romantic, occasionally brutal, sometimes chaotic, often, but always practical. And nothing benefits a practical city like stable, predictable law. London understood the value of clear contracts, safe streets, protected trade, reliable courts, and a king who preferred paperwork to random destruction. Henry II gave London exactly what it needed, a world in which ambition could grow safely, and London rewarded him with loyalty. Not the emotional kind, but the firm, dependable, business-like loyalty of a city that knows who helps it thrive. A kingdom rebalanced. Henry II's legal reforms spread far beyond London. They restrained local nobles, protected travelers, secured property rights, strengthened the crown, and unified England in a way no earlier king had managed. London felt this change first. And London grew because of it. The markets grew, guilds prospered, merchants flourished, craftsmen multiplied, trade deepened, the population expanded, streets grew crowded. New suburbs sprouted beyond the Roman walls. The city was preparing, quietly, steadily, for the next century of growth. Henry II may have ruled a vast empire, but it was London. That turned his reforms into lasting reality in parchment and stone, in law and daily life. The city carried his vision forward, long after his voice vanished. Chapter 6. The last years of Henry II and London on the edge of empire. By the time the 1180s arrived, Henry II had been king for nearly 30 years. 30 years of reforms, travels, arguments, negotiations, lawmaking, castle building, and occasionally yelling at sheriffs. He had reshaped England. He had reshaped London. He had reshaped the very idea of kingship, but even great kings are still human. And in Henry's final decade, London watched a king once unstoppable begin to bend beneath the weight of age, grief, ambition, and the unrelenting pressure of his own family. The empire that never rested. Henry II ruled an empire stretching from the Scottish borders to the warm vineyards of Aquitaine in southern France. It was vast, rich, complicated, full of ambitious nobles, proud duchesses, rebellious sons, strategic castles, and enough paperwork to give any clerk nightmares. Henry never stopped moving. London to Normandy, Normandy to Anjou, Anjou, Aquitaine, Aquitaine to London, London to Wales, Wales back again. Messengers galloped across the kingdom like comets. Ships raced across the channel. London's clerks barely slept. The city had become the engine of a continental empire, a place where information flowed like water. Maps unrolled, seals pressed, letters opened, quills scribbled furiously. London thrived in this rhythm of governance. But even the city could sense the strain on the king who held all the strings. The sons who wanted more. If Henry had one fatal flaw, it was that he had too many brilliant, ambitious children, and not enough crowns to give them. His sons. Henry the young king, Richard, Geoffrey, and John each carried a spark of their parents' fire. From Eleanor, they inherited ambition, pride, charm, and a sense of destiny. From Henry, they inherited willpower, intelligence, strategy, and an aversion to being told no. It was a dangerous combination. Londoners read the royal tensions like a book. The sons are restless. Richard wants Aquitaine. The young king demands real power. Geoffrey is making alliances. John is plotting something. He always is. Henry tried to control his sons, but they were like 4 arrows shot from one bow. Once released, they could not be recalled. What followed were rebellions, truces, reconciliations, betrayals, and London heard every ripple. Merchants gossiped, nobles whispered in Westminster, priests prayed for peace, sheriffs waited anxiously for orders, clerks prepared for emergencies. A kingdom in motion creates a city in motion, and London always felt the tremors first. The Great Rebellion of 1173 to 74, the first great revolt, came like a thunderstorm. Henry the young king, Richard, Geoffrey, and even Queen Eleanor herself rose against Henry II. Families in medieval Europe didn't argue. They launched rebellions. London braced itself. Would the city be attacked? Would the tower stand firm? Would trade halt? Would fire spread through the streets? But Henry, in one of his most extraordinary displays of leadership, crushed the rebellion. London celebrated quietly, not with cheers, but with the relieved sigh of a city that values stability above all. Still, something had changed. Eleanor was imprisoned. The sons were forgiven but not forgotten. Henry grew older, heavier with disappointment. London sensed in him a new heaviness, like a great tower settling into the earth after an earthquake. The death of the young king. Tragedy struck in 1183. Henry the young king, once the golden son, the heir, the future of England, died of illness at just 28. His death shook the realm. Londoners gathered in churches, lighting candles, praying for the king who must now mourn a child. Chroniclers wrote that Henry II wept more for this one son than for any event of his life. It softened him. It exhausted him. And it sharpened the ambitions of his surviving children. Richard saw a clearer path to the crown. Geoffrey maneuvered politically. John waited patiently, like a cat crouched behind a door. London watched all of this unfold, with the tired understanding of a city long accustomed to royal storms. London in the late Henry II era. While the royal family unraveled, London thrived. Trade expanded. The city pulsed with goods from distant lands, Flemish cloth, French wine, Baltic amber, Scandinavian timber, German metalwork, Italian spices, English wool, always in high demand. The Thames swelled with ships. The wharves buzzed. Dockhands shouted over the noise of cargo. The population grew. More homes, more markets, more noise, more life. Guilds solidified their power. Quality improved. Apprentices learned. Craftsmen prospered. Law courts grew busier. Disputes rose with trade. Records multiplied. Judges traveled and returned in steady cycles. Stone buildings continued to rise. London was still mostly timber, but each new stone structure felt like a promise, a sign of wealth, ambition, and permanence. London was becoming the economic heart of Henry's empire, even as his family strained at the edges. Geoffrey's death, another blow. In 1186, Henry's son Geoffrey died in a tournament accident. Another young life gone. Another thread of hope snapped. Londoners mourned again, not for a prince they knew personally, but for the sorrow that weighed on the king and the instability that followed every royal tragedy. The city's clergy held mass, candles burned in chapels, whispers filled taverns. Only Richard and John remain now. Richard wants the throne. John wants everything, probably. Will Henry hold this kingdom together much longer? Richard turns against his father. The final blow came from the son Henry once placed the most hope in, Richard, soon to earn the title, the Lionheart. Richard demanded recognition as heir. Henry refused, perhaps fearing that once named successor, Richard would press harder. Tension thickened like mist along the Thames. Then Richard allied with the King of France. Together they launched a war against Henry II. London felt the shock. War between father and son. War that could reshape the kingdom. War that could topple everything Henry had built. The king's final days. By 1189, Henry II was a dying man, ill, exhausted, and defeated by betrayal from within his own blood. When he learned that even John, his youngest and once favored son, had joined Richard against him, the king whispered, "Now let all things be as they will." His heart broke before his body did. He died in France, far from London, far from the city he had strengthened and reorganized, far from the tower that held his reforms. News reached London quickly. Bells rang. Shops closed early. Priests prayed. London did not weep dramatically. London rarely did. But it bowed its head in deep respect. The king who shaped London. Henry II's reign had been long, turbulent, brilliant, and heartbreaking. He left behind a unified legal system, royal courts, assizes, early juries, organized records, strong sheriffs, a powerful tower, expanding trade, a growing city, a stable foundation for future kings. London would never be the same. His reforms shaped the city more than any monarch before him. And as the crown passed to Richard, the Lionheart London stood ready, confident, prepared, stronger than ever. A city built not just on stone and timber, but on law, order, and ambition. Henry II had given London the tools it needed to rise into the next century, and rise it would. Chapter 7. Richard the Lionheart, the king who was never home. When Henry II died in 1189, London braced itself for the arrival of the new king. Richard Plantagenet, soon to be known as Richard the Lionheart, one of the most famous kings in English history, and also one of the kings who spent the least amount of time in England. If London had feelings, and by now we might as well admit it does, it probably would have said, "Welcome, Your Majesty. Will you be staying long?" Richard would have smiled politely, tightened his armor straps, and replied, "No." A warrior, not a manager. Richard was born a prince, but he lived like a knight. Where Henry II loved administration, paperwork, and legal reform, Richard loved battles, tournaments, sieges, crusades, adventures, chivalry, and collecting extremely expensive weapons. If Henry was the CEO of medieval England, Richard was the action movie hero who walked into the office, signed a document or two, and then leapt out the window shouting, "To glory!" Londoners, always practical, looked at their new king with curiosity. He is brave. He is tall. He seems like the type to fight a dragon. Will he lower taxes? Probably not. Richard was charismatic, spectacularly courageous, and uninterested in domestic government. But London, ever adaptable, learned to live with the king who treated England like a very large bank, and London like the most efficient ATM in Europe. The coronation. Splendor and shadow. Richard's coronation in 1189 at Westminster Abbey was a lavish spectacle. London gleamed with banners and ribbons. The streets filled with nobles, knights, clerics, merchants, and curious citizens. Gold cloth hung from windows, candles flickered, trumpets blared, and the city, dressed in its finest medieval splendor, welcomed a king who looked every inch the hero of legend. But beneath the celebration, a shadow moved. A terrible rumor spread that Jews had been forbidden to attend the coronation. Some came anyway, bearing gifts, and were attacked by crowds who twisted the moment of joy into violence. Riots erupted. Homes were burned. People were killed. It was one of the darkest days in London's medieval history. A reminder that even in moments of pageantry, fear and prejudice could ignite devastation. Richard condemned the violence, but the damage was done. London learned a sobering truth. Sometimes danger came not from foreign wars, but from within its own walls. A king preparing for the crusade. Richard spent only a few months in England before leaving for the Third Crusade, but those few months were intense. He sold titles, he sold lands, he sold offices, he sold privileges. He likely would have sold the Tower of London if someone had offered a decent price. He needed money, mountains of it, to fund his crusading army. London, as the wealthiest city in England, became the financial heart of Richard's preparations. Merchants loaned money, Italian bankers set up accounts, guilds contributed funds, ships were hired, supplies were gathered, armorers worked day and night. The Thames filled with vessels awaiting departure. A forest of masts rising over the water, creaking in the wind. London buzzed with excitement. An adventure was beginning. A king was leaving. And when Richard finally departed, his armor shining like a moving constellation, London watched him go with a mix of pride and trepidation. "May God protect him," the people said, "and may he come back soon." But he would not come back soon. Not at all. London without its king. Once Richard left England, something unusual happened. London realized it functioned perfectly well without him. The justices remained, the sheriffs remained, the guilds remained, the tower remained, the courts remained. The merchants remained, the markets remained, the laws, thanks to Henry II, remained strong. Richard had inherited a kingdom that practically ran itself. His absence meant more work for the justiciars. the officials he left in charge. And for his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who acted as political anchor while her son chased glory in the east. London adapted quickly because London always adapts. It held its breath as news trickled in victories at Acre, the march toward Jerusalem, Richard's duels with Saladin, desert heat, sieges, treaties, diplomacy, valor that seemed almost mythical. But the city also heard other news. Less triumphant, Richard's army struggling, dwindling resources, and worst of all, Richard's capture. The King in Chains. In 1192, as Richard returned from the crusade, storms blew his ship off course. He was forced to travel disguised through Europe, a king in cloak and hood sneaking across borders. But he was recognized, captured, imprisoned by Duke Leopold of Austria, handed over to the Holy Roman Emperor. A king, one of Europe's most powerful warriors, was locked away in a distant castle. London froze. For months, no one knew where Richard was. Some feared he was dead. Others whispered conspiracy. Clerks prayed for clarity. Merchants worried. The tower tightened its guard. Eleanor, now in her 70s, traveled tirelessly across Europe to find and ransom her son. And when the emperor finally revealed that Richard lived, he demanded a ransom so enormous that London itself felt its weight. The ransom of a king. Henry II's legal system had made London wealthy. Trade had made it powerful. Now all of that wealth was needed. To free Richard, England was ordered to pay 150,000 marks, a staggering sum equivalent to several years of royal revenue. London did not hesitate. Guilds contributed, merchants donated, churches collected offerings. Taxes were raised. Silver poured into the Tower of London until its vaults looked like a dragon's hoard. London paid, England paid. Eleanor negotiated, and at last, Richard walked free. The Lionheart returns. He returned to England in 1194, glorious, furious, determined. London erupted, bells rang. Crowds filled the streets. Banners waved, ships fired ceremonial volleys, and the bells of St. Paul's echoed like thunder. For the first time, London saw its king again. Older, hardened, scarred by war and imprisonment. He forgave those loyal to him. He punished those who betrayed him. He reasserted control. And then, within weeks, he left again, off to fight in France and to reclaim lands, to battle rivals, to defend his empire. London watched him go with resigned affection. That's our king? The city sighed, never still. The death of the Lionheart. In 1199, Richard the Lionheart died from a crossbow wound while besieging a small castle in France. When the news reached London, a heavy silence fell. He had been gone for most of his reign, but he was still their king, a symbol of courage, a legend in his own lifetime, a man whose battles shaped Europe. London mourned him quietly. Candles flickered in chapels. Church bells tolled. Traders paused. Monks prayed. and the city seemed to exhale a long, weary sigh. Richard had lived like fire, brilliant, hot, restless, and like fire he burned out quickly. London after. Richard. For London, Richard's reign meant fewer domestic reforms, more taxes, more trade, thanks to crusading demand, heavier financial responsibility, a growing administrative class, stronger international ties, and the realization that England could survive and even thrive without a king constantly present. Richard had not shaped London with laws, the way Henry II had. He had shaped it with circumstances, his long absences forced stronger bureaucrats, more capable sheriffs, disciplined courts, and a city learning to carve its own destiny. London had become self-assured, a city that ran efficiently regardless of a king's presence. And as the crown passed to his brother, a very different man stepped forward, King John. London straightened its back, tightened its grip on its ledgers, and prepared itself. Because if Richard was the king who was never home, John would be the king. London could never forget. Chapter 8. King John, a storm over London and the road to Magna Carta. When Richard the Lionheart died in 1199, London braced itself. The crown now passed to John, youngest son of Henry II, brother of Richard, and a man with a reputation so shaky that even medieval chroniclers, who adored drama, struggled to describe him politely. One wrote simply, "John was not like his father." Another wrote, "John was not like his brother." And a third wrote, with admirable honesty, "John was John." London Practical as always translated this to mean, "Trouble is coming." The city looks at its new king. Unlike Richard, who treated England like a homeland he occasionally visited, John stayed in England more often. At first, London appreciated this. A present king, a government close by, a monarch who actually spent time in the city. It seemed promising. But London soon realized something unsettling. A king being physically present is not always the same as a king being competent. John was intelligent, sharper than most kings before him. He was educated, strategic, a skillful administrator, and capable of understanding complex financial systems. That would make a modern accountant weep with joy. But he was also unpredictable, suspicious, impulsive, vengeful, and deeply insecure. He wanted to be loved. He wanted to be feared. He wanted control. London quickly learned that satisfying John was like trying to hold water in your hands. No matter what you did, something always slipped through. The fall of Normandy. A shockwave through London. John inherited Richard's vast territories. England, Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine, and more. But in 1204, disaster struck. John lost Normandy to the King of France. This wasn't just a geopolitical shift. It was a cultural earthquake. For more than a century, England's kings had been Normans ruling a cross-channel empire. Many London merchants, clerks, bishops, and nobles, had lands, family, and business across the Channel. Losing Normandy meant disrupted trade, severed property ties, rising insecurity, humiliation for the crown, and the beginning of a new phase of English identity. Londoners whispered, "Is this the end of the Angevin Empire? What happens to our trade? Will taxes rise?" "They always rise." John blamed his barons. His barons blamed John, and London, caught in the middle, tightened its belt and prepared for the next blow. John and taxes. A complicated love story. John needed money, vast amounts of it, to fight the French, to defend remaining territories, to rebuild armies, to maintain court life, and to satisfy his own sense of royal dignity. So he taxed, and taxed, and taxed again. London felt every coin. Merchants grumbled, guilds sighed, fishmongers shook their heads. Alehouses buzzed with complaints. The tower's treasury overflowed. John squeezed the city like a lemon and expected it to keep producing juice. London, to its credit, kept paying. For a while, a discours. A king at odds with the church? If John had a list of people to argue with, he would have put the church at the top, and then enthusiastically checked it off. The crisis began in 1205, when the Archbishop of Canterbury died. The monks chose one candidate. John chose another, and the Pope chose a third. It was a medieval version of, I choose this. Well, I choose that. No, I choose something else entirely. John refused the Pope's choice. The Pope retaliated. England was placed under interdict, meaning church services were halted. Marriages couldn't be performed. The dead couldn't be buried properly. Imagine the entire city hearing, no more mass, no more weddings, no more funerals. Londoners felt spiritually stranded. And John, he responded by seizing church lands. This did not improve the situation. Eventually, John surrendered to the Pope because ruling a kingdom in eternal religious penalty is not good for business. But the damage to his reputation lingered, heavy as fog, over the Thames. London becomes the negotiation table of the realm. By the early 1210s, John was at odds with his barons, the church, the French, the Scots, the Welsh, several mercenary captains, the city of London, the weather, and occasionally himself. London's streets filled with murmurs. The barons will revolt. John cannot keep demanding money. Something must change. The king grows desperate. What will happen to us? Merchants sensed the tension. Guilds prepared cautiously. Sheriffs reported unease. Clergy prayed for peace and for their lands back. The pressure built like a storm gathering strength. And in 1214, the storm broke. The disaster at Bouvines. John attempted to reclaim land in France and restore his shattered prestige. The Battle of Bouvines in 1214 was catastrophic. John's forces, a coalition of allies and mercenaries, were decisively defeated. It was the final straw. When news reached London, the city felt the shock in its bones. Merchants panicked, barons raged, clergymen paled. The Tower's officials braced for chaos. John returned to England a weakened king. No victories, no glory. Only enormous debt and endless demands for more taxes. The barons had had enough, and they gathered their forces, took an oath, raised their banners, and marched. London chooses a side. In 1215, in a moment that would echo for centuries, London made its choice. And London did not choose King John. The city opened its gates to the rebel barons. The bells rang, crowds cheered. Guildsmen shook hands with knights. Clerics blessed the banner of rebellion. London became the barons' stronghold, the center of opposition to royal tyranny. John was stunned. He had assumed London would always support the crown. He underestimated the city. London valued stability, trade, law, rights, predictability, fair taxation, and good governance. John had endangered all of these. So London stood with the barons. It was a turning point in English history. The road to Runnymede. Faced with rebellion, with London defying him, with barons advancing, with the church watching, John had no choice. He agreed to meet. Not in a hall, not in a castle, but in a meadow by the Thames. Runnymede. There in June 1215, London's representatives stood beside the barons as they presented a document, a charter, a list of demands, a set of rights, a limit on royal power. John sealed it, and the world shifted. Magna Carta, London's victory. Magna Carta was not just a piece of parchment. It was a promise that even kings must obey the law. It protected merchants, towns, churches, barons, rights of free men, common procedures, inheritance rules, property, and the liberties of London itself. One clause stated explicitly that London would keep its ancient liberties. The city had helped birth Magna Carta, and it would never forget it. A king broken by his own reign. John never accepted Magna Carta in his heart. He tried to annul it. He fought the barons again. Civil war erupted. But in 1216, weak, sick, and defeated, John died. London did not rejoice. For all his flaws, he had been their king, a man whose reign brought profound suffering, but also profound change. The city took a deep breath, as if releasing years of held tension. England would move forward. London would rise higher. And Magna Carta, born from conflict, shaped by London, signed by a broken king, would become one of the most important documents in world history. Chapter 9. Henry III, the Builder King, and London's Gothic awakening. When King John died in 1216, London exhaled, slowly, cautiously, like someone opening a window after a long, suffocating storm. The crown passed to his 9-year-old son, Henry III, a child king. Normally this would terrify London, But this time, strangely, it felt like hope. A boy could be guided, shaped, taught, maybe even loved. Most importantly, a boy had not yet made enemies. London, tired from rebellion and war, looked at young Henry and thought, perhaps this time we begin again. A child on the throne. Henry III's early reign was guided by experienced men. William Marshal, the legendary knight, the Archbishop of Canterbury, loyal royalists, and a council determined to restore stability. London supported them wholeheartedly. The city had no desire to repeat the chaos of John's final years. Trade needed peace, markets needed safety, guilds needed stability. And so, for the first time in a long time, England, and London with it, began to mend. Henry grew up not as a warrior, but as a thoughtful, artistic, deeply pious young man, where Richard loved swords, and John loved quarrels. Henry loved architecture, saints, liturgy, illuminated manuscripts, jewels, storytelling, elaborate church decoration, and anything French and elegant and gorgeous and oh so refined. To put it gently, Henry III was not a Plantagenet in temperament. He was softer. Some chroniclers joked that he was more monk than king. London didn't mind. After decades of war, a gentle king was rather refreshing. Rebuilding a kingdom and a city. Henry III inherited a realm in pieces. Civil war had scarred the countryside. Magna Carta needed reaffirmation. Barons needed reassurance. Churches needed rebuilding. London was central to this healing process. The city became the administrative heart of reform. Charters renewed, liberties protected, trade secured, courts stabilized, taxes moderated, at least for a while. Henry's government, peaceful and steady, allowed London to grow faster than ever. The population surged, houses multiplied, markets expanded. Ships crowded the Thames like never before. The scars of John's reign slowly faded. Henry's great dream, Westminster Abbey reborn. If there is one thing Henry III loved above all, it was building. And his greatest obsession was a single project: the complete rebuilding of Westminster Abbey. The old abbey was respectable, traditional, historical. Henry looked at it and thought, no, it must be magnificent. He wanted a cathedral, worthy of kings, a glowing monument of faith, a jewel of architecture, a shrine for Saint Edward the Confessor, whom Henry admired with emotional intensity. Thus began one of the greatest building projects in London's medieval history. The Gothic Revolution arrives. Henry introduced to London a style then sweeping across Europe. Gothic architecture. Features included pointed arches, tall windows, intricate carvings, ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, soaring ceilings, ethereal light, and an overall aesthetic best described as, let's see how close we can get this building to touching heaven. Londoners were astonished. Westminster Abbey began rising, not like a fortress, but like a prayer sculpted in stone. Workers toiled day and night, masons carving saints and angels, glaziers crafting stained glass miracles, carpenters shaping timber roofs, sculptors chiseling impossible details, laborers hauling stone from distant quarries. The sight of the new abbey became a source of wonder for citizens and travelers alike. People whispered, "This is the future. This is London becoming grand." The Tower of London, a new face. Henry didn't stop with Westminster. He also transformed the Tower of London. Under Henry III, the tower gained new curtain walls, improved defenses, luxurious royal apartments, painted chambers, ornate furnishings, gardens, a royal menagerie. Yes, lions and leopards lived there. Londoners joked, William the Conqueror built a fortress. Henry III is building a palace. And they weren't wrong. For the first time, the tower became more than a symbol of power. It became a royal residence fit for ceremony. London's golden century begins. The 1200s marked one of London's great turning points. Under Henry III, a population reached nearly 40,000. Guilds matured into political forces. Livery companies formed. Trade with Europe exploded. Italian bankers arrived. The wool trade surged. Bridges and roads improved. Markets multiplied. Parishes expanded. And churches filled with art. Legal institutions grew stronger. Westminster became the center of government. London was transforming into the heart of England, not just politically, economically, culturally, spiritually, a world city in the making. Yet all was not peaceful. Henry III's gentle personality did not mean a gentle reign. He had two major weaknesses. One, he spent too much money. Buildings, art, ceremonies, foreign relatives. Henry loved them all, and someone had to pay. Londoners, hearing the approach of tax collectors, would mutter, "Oh no, what is he building now? Oh no, which cousin is he funding now? Oh no, wow. Many candles does one chapel need?" Henry never learned moderation. 2. The barons wanted more power. The memory of Magna Carta remained strong. Barons wanted assurances, checks, representation, predictability. They were not opposed to Henry personally. They liked him. He was polite, but they wanted a functioning constitutional monarchy, not a king whose spending habits could rival an enthusiastic interior designer. Tensions grew, slowly, quietly, relentlessly. London in the middle of a growing storm. By the 1250s, baronial anger simmered. Taxes were heavy. Foreign advisors influenced the king. Royal projects drained the treasury. Merchants worried. Guilds grew cautious. London, always politically sensitive, watched both sides. On one hand, the city respected the monarchy. Henry had protected London's liberties. He had fostered trade. On the other hand, London valued stability, and baronial discontent threatened it. For the moment, the city stayed neutral. But neutrality cannot last forever. In a kingdom slowly slipping into crisis, the Provisions of Oxford, a constitutional earthquake. In 1258, the pressure finally reached its limit. Barons confronted Henry at Westminster. They demanded reform, limits on royal power, regular parliaments, baronial councils to oversee government, financial controls, the removal of unpopular advisors. Henry had no choice, and he agreed. The Provisions of Oxford were born, one of the earliest steps toward the parliamentary system. London felt the tremor. A new political world was emerging. Government was no longer the king alone. It was the beginning of something shared, something broader, something more English. Simon de Montfort. Friend or foe? The leading baron was Simon de Montfort, a charismatic, principled, and ambitious noble. London admired him. He championed reform. He sought justice. He promised stability. But soon, Henry and Simon fell into conflict. War broke out. The Second Barons' War. London chose sides. It sided with the barons. Why? They defended Magna Carta. They promised predictable governance. They appealed to merchants. They protected London's liberties. And Henry, for all his gentleness, had become politically unreliable. For a moment, it seemed like England might fall apart. The first real parliament. In 1265, Simon de Montfort summoned a parliament. That included not just nobles and bishops, but commoners, representatives from towns and boroughs. London sent delegates. It was revolutionary. The idea that ordinary townsmen, guild leaders, and merchants could participate in national government was astonishing. The echo of this moment will continue for centuries, and London, proud and powerful, never forgot that it was part of this first spark of modern democracy. The war's end and Henry's final years. Eventually, a Prince Edward, Henry's son, defeated Simon de Montfort at the Battle of Evesham. Peace returned. Henry, older now, spent his remaining years quietly praying, building, decorating Westminster, finishing parts of the Abbey, and trying to mend a kingdom fractured by internal conflict. He died in 1272. London mourned him, not as a perfect king, but as a gentle one, a builder, a dreamer, a monarch, whose greatest gifts to the city were made of stone, glass, and quiet devotion. Westminster Abbey, his masterpiece, stood as his legacy. And London, bright, Gothic, ambitious, rising, was ready for a new age, the age of Edward I, a king very unlike his father, and one who would shape London in ways both magnificent and terrifying. Chapter 10. Edward I, the Hammer of Kings, and London's new authority. When Henry III died in 1272, London did something unusual. It didn't panic. It didn't whisper nervously. It didn't wait anxiously at the gates. It didn't even look around wondering who's in charge now. Because Edward, Henry's eldest son, was already a legend, strong, tall, sharp-minded, battle-tested, respected by nobles, admired by soldiers, and, perhaps most importantly for London, decisive. He was away on crusade when his father died, but London did not hesitate to accept him as king. For the first time in a long time, the transition of power felt almost calm. It was as though the city whispered, "Yes, this is right." And so began the reign of Edward I, the king who would reshape England's laws, extend its military reach, and leave a mark on London deeper than anyone since William the Conqueror. The bare-knuckle nature of a new king. Edward was not his father. Henry III was gentle, artistic, emotional, religious, the kind of king who would insist on repainting palace walls 3 times because the gold leaf wasn't shimmery enough. Edward, on the other hand, was a king who approached problems with the energy of someone holding a very large hammer and believing everything might be a nail. He was disciplined, efficient, strategic, cold at times, brilliant often, relentless always. London respected him immediately. Here was a monarch who understood law, order, taxes, trade, warfare, and the needs of a growing empire. London, wealthy, powerful, ambitious, thrived under such a king. A city of contracts, coins, and courts. Edward I loved law, not in the abstract philosophical way, but in the practical, efficient, let's fix this broken medieval bureaucracy way. Under him, courts expanded. New legal reforms were passed. Property rights were clarified, contracts standardized, statutes written. Judges traveled more frequently. Sheriffs were held accountable. Corruption was punished. And the crown's authority over the realm solidified. London became the beating heart of this legal revolution. The city's merchants rejoiced. Law meant predictability. Predictability meant safety. Safety meant profit. And profit? Well, London has always had opinions about profit. The Great Welsh Campaigns. London pays, London profits. Edward I turned his attention first to Wales. For centuries, English kings claimed lordship over Wales, with about as much success as someone trying to claim ownership of a wild mountain goat. But Edward was determined. He launched a series of enormous military campaigns, building stone castles that still dominate the Welsh landscape today. Caernarfon, Conwy, Harlech, and more. These projects required money, masons, carpenters, grain, weapons, ships, wagons, armor, officials, supplies, and endless administrative support. Where did much of this come from? London. London merchants provided materials. London guilds provided craftsmen. London markets provided grain. London banks provided credit. London ports provided ships. Every hammer strike in Wales echoed faintly through London's economy. London grows and groans. The late 13th century was a time of rapid expansion. Population surged, suburbs grew, parishes expanded, markets overflowed. Trade routes widened, Foreign merchants flocked to the city. New wharves were built. The Thames buzzed day and night. Guilds became political powerhouses. London was becoming a metropolis in a world that barely had the word for such a thing. But with growth came problems: sanitation issues, overcrowding, fire hazards, crime, disputes, and rising tensions between rich and poor. Edward I dealt with these problems the way he dealt with everything: with law. Lots of law. New ordinances regarding pricing, weights, and measures, markets, trade regulations, guild oversight, public order, city taxes, river management, and building safety. Some Londoners admired him, some feared him, but everyone obeyed him. The Jewish community in London, a tragic turn. One of the darkest aspects of Edward's reign was his treatment of England's Jewish population. London had a significant Jewish community: scholars, merchants, financiers, highly skilled, deeply integrated into the city's economy. But anti-Jewish sentiment ran deep in medieval Europe. Under pressure, financial, religious, and political, Edward issued the Edict of Expulsion in 1290. All Jews were to leave England. London watched families pack their lives into boxes, homes abandoned, synagogues closed, books carried carefully to ships at the docks. It was a wound on the city, one that would not heal for centuries. A city that thrived on diversity lost a part of itself. In the calm of night, one imagines London murmuring, "This was not our finest hour." The Scottish Wars. A kingdom on the move. If Edward's campaigns in Wales had been impressive, his campaigns in Scotland were monumental. He sought to bring Scotland under English control. Wars erupted. Castles fell. Rebellions sparked. Names like William Wallace and Robert the Bruce entered legend. London, distant from the battles, felt the impact. In other ways, increased taxation, military requisitions, legal documents, treasury demands, propaganda, political tension, but also wealth from supplying the war effort. Expanded administrative roles, growing influence in Parliament, and a deeper sense of its role in national politics. By the late 1200s, London was not merely the largest city in England, it was the center of England's empire-building machinery. Enter Parliament. London takes a seat at the table. Edward I did not invent Parliament, but he formalized it, strengthened it, and made it a regular instrument of governance. London loved this. Representatives from the city, usually members of wealthy guilds, sat in assemblies beside nobles and bishops. They discussed taxation, trade, war funding, legal reforms, city liberties, national policy. For the first time, London's voice shaped the kingdom, not through rebellion or negotiation, but through structured political participation. It was a powerful moment. The city was no longer a bystander. It was a player. The Statue of the Realm. Law as Architecture. Edward's legal reforms were so comprehensive that chroniclers compared them to rebuilding the kingdom from the foundation. Key statutes: Westminster 1, 2, 3, Gloucester, Mortmain, Winchester, quo warranto, quia emptores. London felt these laws intimately. Contracts became clearer, property disputes more manageable. Merchants gained protections. Corporations became standardized. Guilds became formalized. Criminal justice became more predictable. The city grew stronger, not only through commerce, but through clarity. Order was wealth. Law was stability. Stability was prosperity. London's new identity at the turn of the century. By the year 1300, London was no longer the city Henry II inherited, or the city Henry III rebuilt. It was something far more formidable. 80,000 inhabitants, miles of wharves, hundreds of guilds, powerful merchant families, a city government with increasing autonomy, international banking connections, a dominant wool trade, an influential voice in Parliament, fortified walls, and a skyline rising ever higher in stone and glass. It was a capital in everything but name, a hub of law, a furnace of commerce, a stage of politics, a magnet for ambition. And above it all, Edward I's firm rule kept order. London grew ambitious under him, braver and sharper, more confident. It had become too big to be ignored, too wealthy to be controlled easily, too vital to the kingdom to be sidelined. The king's final years. A quiet thunder. Edward I's strength lasted into old age, but even hammers eventually crack. By the early 1300s, illness slowed him. The Scottish wars drained resources. Political tensions simmered. Reforms began to stretch thin. He died in 1307. On campaign in the north, still trying to bend Scotland to his will. London received the news with deep respect. This was a king who had given the city law, authority, structure, political representation, economic expansion, and a place in the machinery of empire. A king who had shaped the very bones of England. London bowed its head not in fear, but in solemn acknowledgement. A chapter had ended. A new one would begin. With Edward II, a king very unlike his father. But that is a story for the next chapter. Chapter 11. Edward II, a fallen king and a city that refused to fall. When Edward I died in 1307, London felt the ground shift beneath its feet. For nearly 40 years, the city had lived under a king carved from iron, a ruler who treated law like architecture and war like a daily profession. Now his son, Edward II, ascended the throne. And London, wise from centuries of experience, studied the young king with wary curiosity. He was tall and handsome, gentle in manner, fond of music, poetry, and theater, more comfortable in gardens than in war camps, more at ease with friends than with advisors, more enamored with pleasure than with policy. If Edward I was the hammer, Edward II was a cushion. London did not say this out loud, of course, but the city had a feeling. A soft king in a hard age rarely ends well. A coronation full of promise and warnings. Edward II was crowned in 1308 at Westminster Abbey, the magnificent Gothic church his grandfather had envisioned, and his father continued to support. The coronation was lavish golden banners, rich tapestries, the smell of incense, chanting monks, nobles glittering in jewels, crowds cheering along the streets, trumpets echoing off the river. But one detail alarmed London. At the coronation banquet, Edward II gave the place of honor, not to his queen, Isabella of France, nor to the great nobles of England, but to his beloved friend, Piers Gaveston. Gaveston was charming, witty, flamboyant, and utterly uninterested in being subtle. He strutted through court like a man who believed. Everyone else existed for his amusement. Londoners whispered, "This is not going to go well." Not at all. Absolutely not. They were correct. Enter Gaveston, the spark that lit a kingdom. Edward II adored Gaveston. He showered him with titles, land, money, influence, all the ingredients guaranteed to irritate the nobility. And irritate them he did. Nobles growled, barons scowled. The royal council fumed. The queen's relatives in France raised eyebrows. Even London, normally a master of neutrality, felt uneasy. Gaveston mocked powerful lords with nicknames that would make a modern politician faint: the Black Dog, the Hog, the Burst Belly. Medieval England was many things, but it was not a place where mocking barons ended well for anyone. London under a neglectful king. While Edward lavished attention on Gaveston, London felt neglected. Edward II did not share his father's appetite for administration. He preferred music over meetings, pageantry over policy, leisurely river rides over treasury accounts, and personal companionship over national obligation. London's merchants muttered, "Does the king understand the economy?" Guild leaders whispered, "Does he care about law?" Officials muttered, "Has he read any of his father's statutes?" Still, London endured. It always did. The city's machinery of trade and governance was strong enough to function despite a distracted monarch. But a kingdom cannot survive on autopilot forever. The Ordinances of 1311. The barons strike back. By 1311, the barons had had enough. They forced Edward to accept. The Ordinances, a set of laws that limited royal power, regulated finances, and most importantly, banished Gaveston. London approved. The city vendors nodded. Guildsmen clapped quietly. Clerks smiled into their ink pots. The tower guards stood a little taller. For a moment, it seemed like the crisis might end peacefully. But Edward brought Gaveston back, again and again and again. London sighed audibly. Gaveston's tragic end. In 1312, the barons took matters into their own hands. They captured Gaveston and executed him. It was brutal, terrible, and illegal. But Edward's inflexibility had left them no choice, at least in their eyes. When news reached London, the city fell silent, not in celebration, not in grief, but in resignation. The balance of power had shattered. The king was humiliated. The barons were emboldened, and the kingdom was slipping toward civil war. London whispered, "This is far from over." The rise of the dispensers. Trouble again. After Gaveston's death, Edward needed new favorites. He found them in the dispenser family, father and son. If Gaveston irritated the nobles, the dispensers enraged them. They acquired enormous lands, interfered with justice, manipulated the king, punished opponents, and behaved like medieval mob bosses with excellent manners. London watched uneasily as tension rose once again. The London of the 1310s, a city under strain. While political drama consumed the royal court, London faced its own challenges. 1. Food shortages, bad harvests, rising prices, merchant anxieties. 2. Weather disasters. The early 1300s saw the beginning of the Little Ice Age. Cold, rain, famine creeping slowly across Europe. 3. Crime and instability, crowded streets, poor sanitation, growing inequality. 4. Tensions between wealthy merchant guilds and poorer laborers. London was booming, but not equally. 5. A king unable to provide steady leadership. Edward II simply didn't have the temperament for crisis management. London carried on, but the city now felt the weight of a heavy sky. The Queen steps in. Isabella of France. Queen Isabella, intelligent, cultured, politically astute, watched her husband flounder. She had tried to work with him and tried to stabilize the court, tried to mediate with the barons, but Edward's obsession with the dispensers made compromise impossible. In 1325, Isabella traveled to France to negotiate peace between England and her homeland. She did not return. Instead, she formed an alliance with a powerful noble named Roger Mortimer. Together with support from exiled barons and foreign allies, they raised an army. London held its breath. The fall of a king. London chooses a side. In 1326, Isabella and Mortimer landed in England. Their forces grew rapidly. Edward II fled London. The dispensers fled with him. Royal authority collapsed like soft wax in sunlight. London faced a choice to support the king or support the Queen and the reformers. The city chose the Queen. London opened its gates to Isabella. Crowds cheered, guilds pledged support, merchants provided funds. The Tower surrendered. It was the same instinct that had guided London in 1215. The city opposed leaders who endangered stability, and Edward II had endangered everything. The dispensers' end and the king's abdication. The dispensers were captured and executed. Edward II, exhausted, defeated, and abandoned by nearly everyone, was forced to abdicate in early 1327 in favor of his son, Edward III, a boy of 14. London did not celebrate. The city was somber. Edward II's fall was tragic. The result of temperament, poor judgment, and circumstances he could not master. A soft king in a hard age rarely survives. London reflects, a city that endured everything. By the end of Edward II's reign, London had survived corrupt favorites, civil unrest, famine, economic strain, political collapse, invasion, a forced abdication, and a shift in royal power. And yet the city remained stronger than ever. Why? Because London had mastered the art of adaptation. It understood how to protect its markets, when to negotiate, when to rebel, when to align, when to endure, and when to change course. London was no longer merely a city under the crown. It was now a political force, a guardian of national stability. And with the ascension of Edward III, a new era was about to begin. An era of war, wealth, plague, power, and a transformation that would test London more than any crisis before. Chapter 12, Edward III, War, Wealth, Plague, and the Making of a Medieval Super City. When 14-year-old Edward III became king in 1327, London felt something it had not felt in years. Hope. A boy king, yes. Young, inexperienced, certainly. But there was something in his eyes, a spark, a steadiness, a quiet determination that London recognized instantly. This child, the city thought, might grow into the king England needed. But for now, the kingdom was not ruled by Edward. Not really. Power rested in the hands of two people: Queen Isabella, his formidable mother, and Roger Mortimer, her ambitious partner. They governed in the boy's name, and at first, London accepted it. After the chaos of Edward II, a functioning government of any kind felt like a warm blanket. But warm blankets can smother just as easily as they comfort. And soon London sensed danger. A puppet king in a dangerous court. At first, Isabella and Mortimer ruled competently, restoring order, securing borders, managing finances, stabilizing courts. London's guilds breathed easier. Merchants reopened their ledgers. The city returned to its usual rhythm. Ships docking, bells chiming, markets clattering. But ambition has sharp edges. Mortimer grew arrogant. He treated the young king like a decorative statue, useful for ceremonies, irrelevant in decisions. He awarded himself titles, lands, wealth. He punished rivals. He controlled council meetings. He stood behind the throne like a shadow with a crown. London murmured, "This looks familiar. We've seen this story before. It did not end well last time." The city watched closely. Because if London had developed any superpower in the Middle Ages, it was the ability to smell political trouble long before it arrived at the gates. the night the boy became king. In 1330, at just 17, Edward III made his move. Under the cover of night with a handful of loyal companions, he surprised Mortimer at Nottingham Castle. Through a secret passage, Mortimer was arrested. Isabella was placed under comfortable house arrest. And Edward, calm and resolute, announced, "I will govern in my own name." London exhaled, finally, a real king, one with a mind like tempered steel and a will like a drawn bow. The era of Edward III had begun. A city awakening under a young visionary. Edward III was everything a medieval king was supposed to be: charismatic, intelligent, disciplined, brave, ambitious, politically skilled, financially shrewd, militarily gifted, and London loved him for it. Under Edward, the city flourished like never before. Trade expanded, guilds grew richer, shipping intensified, markets overflowed. Foreign merchants arrived in droves. The royal court glittered with festivals and ceremony. The administrative machine hummed like a well-tuned instrument. London was becoming not just a great city of England, but a great city of Europe. But this prosperity came with a price, because Edward III had a dream. A huge, shimmering dream. And dreams in the Middle Ages required armies. The root of a century of war. Edward III believed he had a claim to the throne of France. Through his mother, Isabella, the French disagreed. Europe held its breath. London sharpened its quills, counted its coins, and began preparing for something enormous: the 100 Years' War. One of the most famous conflicts in human history. Of course, London didn't know it would last a century. Everyone assumed it would be quick. Everyone was wrong. War fuels a city. War is destruction, yes, but it is also movement of money, ships, supplies, diplomacy, and administration. London spun like a wheel. In motion, armorers forged weapons. Shipbuilders expanded docks. Merchants financed expeditions. Bankers arranged loans. Scribes produced endless documents. Warehouses filled with wool exports to Flanders. Soldiers marched through city gates. The tower bristled with activity. War was costly, but it also pumped gold into London's bloodstream, and the city grew stronger. Crécy, Calais, and the Lion's Roar. Edward III's campaigns were shocking in their success. 1,337. War declared. 1,340. Victory at Sluys, where England destroyed the French fleet. 1,346. The legendary Battle of Crécy. 1,347. The siege and capture of Calais. London roared with pride. When news of Crécy reached the city, bells rang across all parishes. Merchants toasted in taverns. Guildmasters boasted in the streets. Victory meant safety. Victory meant prestige. Victory meant trade. But triumph carries shadows. and the darkest shadow in European history was drifting silently toward London. The Black Death arrives. It began as whispers, rumors from the continent, stories of towns emptying overnight, villages silent, churchyards overflowing. London pretended not to hear. Merchants kept working, guilds held meetings. The city moved, loud and busy as always. But plague does not respect walls, wealth, or willpower. It came by ship. Slipping into London with the tide, no one saw it arrive, but everyone felt it. The Black Death swept through the city. Like a shadow made of knives, people fell ill suddenly. Streets emptied. Families barricaded themselves indoors. Church bells tolled endlessly. Graveyards overflowed. The scent of burning incense filled the air. Clergy worked until they collapsed. Physicians were powerless. Markets fell silent. London, the city that never stopped moving, that was brought to its knees. Some chroniclers said a third of the city died, others said half. The truth is lost, but the sorrow remains. And yet, London survived. Slowly, painfully, steadily. Because London always survives. A city that rose from ashes. When the plague receded, London felt like a ghost of itself. Empty homes, silent workshops, abandoned docks, shattered families, fields without workers, a treasury strained. But from this devastation came unexpected change. Labor was suddenly precious. Workers could demand higher wages. Guilds reorganized. Women took on new roles in business. As survivors gained opportunities once impossible, London became more flexible, wealthier, and socially transformed. The city's resilience stunned Europe. The golden age of chivalry, a royal court reborn. Edward III believed that after tragedy, a kingdom needed beauty. So he created a court that shimmered like legend. Tournaments glittered with armor. Feasts lasted for days. Poetry echoed in halls. The Order of the Garter was founded, a chivalric fellowship that still exists today. Windsor Castle expanded. Westminster thrived. London Bridge bustled, and royal ceremonies dazzled the city. For a moment, London felt like the center of a reborn world. War continued, yes, but London now balanced war and culture, conflict and creativity. It was becoming something new, a medieval super city. The king's final years, a quiet decline. As Edward III aged, the brilliance of his youth faded. Illness crept in. Grief took hold as family members died. Factions formed at court. His ambitious son Edward, the Black Prince, the shining star of the royal house, fell sick and died. In 1376, London mourned deeply. The city rang bells for days. Guilds held vigils. Merchants closed shops. A year later, in 1377, Edward III died. London lost a king who had led it through triumph and devastation. war and plague, building a city stronger than ever. He was not perfect, no king was, but he had left London, wealthy, confident, fiercely resilient, and through him the city had stepped fully into the late Middle Ages. As the beating heart of England, a new king now rose, Richard II, young and fragile, and London sensed that the next era would not be easy, but the city, wiser than any monarch, was ready. It always was. Chapter 13. Richard II, Pride, Poetry, and the Flames of Rebellion. When Edward III died in 1377, the crown passed once more to a child, a boy of just 10 years old, Richard II. London stared at its new king with a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope. A child on the throne was risky, but England had seen young kings before. Sometimes they grew into greatness, but Richard would be something different. Not a warrior like his grandfather, not a reformer like his namesake, Richard I. Not a builder like Henry III, Richard II was a dreamer, a poet, a lover of beauty, ritual, and divine kingship. He imagined the world not as it was, but as he believed it should be. A vision that would someday lift him high and someday cast him down, and London, the ever-practical city, would stand at the center of his triumphs, his tragedies, and his unraveling. A child king in a complicated world. At 10 years old, Richard II possessed grace, intelligence, and the golden-haired charm of a storybook prince. He was raised in the royal apartments of the Tower of London, watched carefully by advisors, uncles, and counselors. London liked him immediately. Children, after all, cannot tax you heavily or drag you into unnecessary wars. Life in the city resumed with familiar rhythm, merchants haggling at Cheapside, bakers shouting prices, ships crowding the Thames, guild apprentices hauling goods, priests ringing bells, officials scribbling in cold offices, and citizens muttering, "At least he seems polite." But outside London the kingdom simmered. Years of war with France had drained England's treasury. The Black Death had slashed the labor force. Wages were rising. Landowners were furious. Taxes soared. Tensions rose like heat from a summer street. Something was going to give, and it would give in London's own backyard. 1381. The year the city caught fire. The spark was a tax. A harsh, unfair, deeply resented poll tax that hit peasants hardest. When royal agents tried to enforce it in Essex and Kent, the countryside erupted. Thousands marched toward London, led by a common man named Wat Tyler and a charismatic priest named John Ball, who preached, "When Adam delved and Eve span, who then was the gentleman?" A simple question, a revolutionary one. By June 1381, the rebel army camped outside London. The city trembled. Walls were strong. The tower was strong. But anger, when shared by thousands, is stronger than stone. London opens its gates. The rebels demanded entry. City officials hesitated, merchants panicked, guilds debated. The air filled with arguments, fear, and clattering boots. And then, someone opened the gates. We don't know who. A sympathizer, a fearful citizen, a rebellious apprentice. But once opened, the flood poured in. Rebels swept into the city. Like a storm breaking through a window, setting fires, freeing prisoners, attacking officials, destroying tax records, burning mansions of hated nobles, smashing symbols of royal authority. London was engulfed in fury and flame. The streets echoed with shouts, the crackling of fire, and the ringing of alarm bells. The rebels surged toward the Tower of London, and inside that fortress the boy king dash. 14 years old, waited. The tower breached. The tower, normally impregnable, was overwhelmed. Rebels forced their way inside. They found officials hiding. They found clerks terrified, and they found the Archbishop of Canterbury, the king's own chancellor. He was dragged out and killed on Tower Hill. Blood on stone, screams over the river, firelight flickering on the White Tower's walls. London had seen violence before, but not like this. Never like this. The city felt as though history itself were splitting open. And in the middle of it, a young king faced the impossible. Richard meets the rebels. On June 14th, 1381, Richard II rode out to Mile End to meet the rebel army, tens of thousands of men, armed with pitchforks, axes, and righteous fury. He was 14, small, beautiful, terrified, but unbroken. London held its breath. And then something remarkable happened. Richard spoke. Calmly, clearly, bravely. "My good people," he said, "I am your king. I will grant your demands. Go home in peace." Shock rippled through the rebels. A boy king was promising justice, fairness, freedom. Many believed him, many knelt, many went home. But Wat Tyler did not. He wanted more. Too much. And the next day at Smithfield, he confronted Richard again. During an argument, the Tyler was struck down by the Lord Mayor of London. Chaos erupted. Rebels shouted. Knights drew swords. London froze. And then Richard did the bravest thing of his entire reign. He rode forward alone toward a crowd of thousands who had just watched their leader die. "Follow me," he said. "I am your captain now." The rebels faltered. Their fury broke. London exhaled. In that moment, Richard II saved his city. A king who peaked too early. After the peasants' revolt, Richard II was hailed as a hero. London loved him. He had been courageous when seasoned nobles had not. But Richard was 14. And adolescence is rarely the foundation of lifelong wisdom. As he grew older, his pride grew with him. He began to see kingship, not as duty, but as destiny. Not as service, but as divine right. He surrounded himself with favorites. He punished critics. He built magnificent palaces. He embraced ceremony and symbolism with a passion bordering on obsession. London admired the pageantry. for a while. The city loved feasts, festivals, banners, parades. But underneath the gold cloth, taxes grew heavy. Justice grew uncertain. Council meetings became theatrical. Royal spending spiraled, and London began to worry. The tyranny years. By the 1390s, Richard II was no longer the brave boy of 1381. He was unpredictable, vindictive. Convinced of his own semi-divine status, he punished London's leaders for the slightest offense. He weakened the city's political rights. He interfered with guild elections. He fined the mayor. He intimidated merchants. He demanded loyalty at all costs. Londoners grumbled in taverns. He forgets who finances the kingdom. He forgets who keeps the ships moving. He forgets who paid for his coronation robes. Old resentment simmered. And then something happened. That changed everything. The rise of Henry Bolingbroke. Richard's cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, was exiled unjustly. His lands were seized illegally. His honor was insulted. It was a mistake. Henry was popular, charismatic, and deeply connected to London's merchant elite. When Richard left England for Ireland in 1399, Henry returned. London reacted instantly. The merchants backed him, the guilds backed him, the Tower opened its gates to him. Crowds cheered his arrival. London had chosen its side. And that side was not the king. The fall of Richard II. Richard returned too late. He was captured, deposed, and imprisoned. He died mysteriously in 1400. Some say starvation, some say murder, some say despair. London did not celebrate his fall, but it felt relief. The release of a city tired of uncertainty. A new king rose, Henry IV, the first Lancastrian monarch, and London, practical and loyal to its own survival, embraced the new dynasty. Richard II's legacy in London. Richard II left behind. Westminster Hall expanded with an enormous hammer beam roof, new artistic styles, a more sophisticated court culture, records of ceremony, poetry, and ritual, a dramatic reminder of what happens when pride rises higher than wisdom. London survived him. It always survived. And now, as the 14th century drew to a close, the city stood on the edge of a new era. An era of Lancastrian kings, foreign wars, internal rebellions, religious transformation, and the dawn of a new century that would test the city again and again. But for tonight, rest. The next chapter, The Wars of the Rose's First Shadows, awaits another evening. Closing, the city that learned to rise. And so, my friend, we come to the end of our quiet walk through those 11.5 centuries, from the steady hands of Henry II to the determined strength of Edward I, a journey of stone, law, fire, markets, whispers, and dreams. Settle again into your blankets. Let the images drift like soft lanterns on a midnight river. London in 1300 is no longer the fragile town William the Conqueror entered. It has become something entirely different. A city of stone towers and wide markets, of chanting monks and echoing guild halls, of ships crowding the Thames, of ringing hammers in Smithfield, of parchment laws signed at Runnymede, of merchants bargaining at Cheapside, of bridges lined with shops and smoke curling above wooden rooftops. It has survived war, revolution, rebellion, famine, taxes, plagues, fires, and kings, who both lifted it and nearly broke it. And yet, London stands quietly, steadily, endlessly resilient. The Normans once rebuilt it, the Plantagenets refined it. And by 1300, the city's pulse beats faster than ever before, full of ambition, restlessness, and possibility. A city ready for the centuries ahead, for the rise of parliaments, for the thunder of Edward I's campaigns, for the new merchants who will shape its destiny, for the great storms and great triumphs waiting just beyond the horizon. Take a slow breath. Feel the centuries settle gently behind you. Let the glow of medieval lamps fade into the soft quiet of your room. London sleeps now, and so may you. When you open your eyes again, a new era will be waiting. An age of tension, crowns, rebellions, and the long shadow of a conflict. That will change England forever. But that is a story. For episode 3, good night, traveler. London will be here when you return.